Greetings, everybody. Thank you for listening to the first ever episode of the Paranormal Case Report. In this podcast, I wish to kind of lay out, just disregard that there's some things happening outside the Astro Van right now, and, I'm just going to dive right into it. I am on a case right now. I'll tell you about it here in a little bit, a few episodes down the line. But things might not go too well for me. Have you ever thought that the creatures of myths and legends, the vampires, the werewolves, the ghosts, ghouls, and goblins out there, have you ever wondered where those myths come from? Well, that's what I investigate. More times it's facts rather than fiction. I'm sure you're not going to believe me right now. I mean, why would you? I'm some lunatic out there on a podcast website. But regardless of how I'm going to be perceived, I decided to go against my superior's best orders and kind of inform the populace about what's going on out there, what's really out there, what could be stalking you tonight, what could be lurking behind every shadow, what could be living in your home. I've decided to do this by telling you my life story, how I first discovered the paranormal, how I kind of fought my way out of certain situations, how I signed up with the agency. And let me tell you, folks, there's a lot of us out there. There's a lot of us who knows what's going on, who actively work to kind of keep you safe. But the people who run the show, they don't want you to know. They believe mass panic would happen if most civilians learned the truth. And we're not really a government-sponsored agency, but we do work with the government. We have people inside every branch, every aspect, and I'm hoping if there's enough people out there listening to me, and if I can kind of keep quiet long enough, stay hidden from view, then hopefully they'll realize that my disappearance will be known about and be felt. Because, look, I'm not saying I'm great at my job, but I've been doing this for over 10 years now, and I'm still around. In fact, our mortality rate, usually our lifespan's about 3 to 4 years once we join up with the agency. So I have a little bit to go off of there, just a little bit of leeway to keep me safe. But even then, I'm breaking one of our top rules here. It's not good for me. So I'm hoping my legion of fans will grow and kind of just act as a deterrent. Which, good luck. I know how to keep quiet, I know how to keep invisible, I know how to look out for myself, but it's certainly going to be a lot harder once I stop, once I run through my supplies, basically. But to keep this thing moving, I'm going to go through and just tell you the chronological events of my life and how it led me to the paranormal. How this crazy life of mine started, basically. See, I was born in a small rural town in kind of central Pennsylvania region. I think it's in the Appalachian mountain range. I'm not 100% sure, but it definitely has that vibe to it. I want to say whenever I was about 6 or so. So this should be summer of 95, I want to say, whenever this happened. My family, we started renting a old farmhouse. And, looking back at it, I was a kid then, but honestly, I drove past this building quite a bit, and it's a nice, sturdy house. Old, just stone siding on the outside. It's an old stone farmhouse. Thing's really cool. Kind of a split level, but I don't know. The top was more of an attic, but I'm sure somebody could have lived up there, turned it into a couple different rooms. It was a really nice house thinking back. But yeah, we moved in there. It was nice at first. I really liked having just a full house, because back then all I knew was cramped apartments at that point. Plus having a yard. I mean, what kid doesn't want to have a yard to just run around in? It was a nice house, but it was pretty soon whenever I realized things just weren't right about it. I mean, you know what it's like. You've been around kids. You remember back whenever you're a kid, every little bump was something suspicious, something going on, but now there was some stuff that you just couldn't write off as the overactive imagination of a 6-year-old, They were things like doors just opening just randomly on their own. And I'm not talking about small movements, It swings an inch. I mean, one of the first months that I was there, my closet door to the bedroom, it was shut. It was fully shut, and there were no windows open, nothing like that. But it just flew open, and I'm sure you can imagine a small child seeing that. Well, whenever I ran in my parents' room, it was they just didn't want to deal with it. Sent me back in there. I tried sleeping that night. I know I drifted off at some point, but it was a hard time. There were other smaller things, just this constant scratching noise coming from the basement. And I was reassured that it was just the coal furnace, because, this was an old house. There was a large coal furnace down there. But, never really came from that direction. See, to describe the basement, it was, you walk down the flight of stairs right around the middle of the house. So it was a large chamber. To the right was a little room. I think there was a workshop there. And then if you kept going right, that's where the furnace was. Another room to hold the coal. I don't know what you call it, a coal room maybe. But when you're going down the stairs, you look to the left, there's a old, I want to say it was like a 1940s Studebaker. Yeah, I know, and it was in great condition. I'm sure it's still there even. It's a beautiful old car. I don't know if it was stored properly or if the engine and everything's just useless now, but it was beautiful. And it also happened to be where the scratching noises came from. I was always kind of a rational child. I just assumed there was squirrels and rats living in it. But, whenever I'd look in there, it looked pretty well sealed. The upholstery wasn't chewed up or anything. It was I mean, other than a large collection of dust, it looked very well maintained. But other than that, as we went on, as time moved, kept living in there, things got even weirder. I think and you have to understand, this is like 2 decades ago for me. My memory's a little fuzzy on most of this. Truth be told, I tried drinking a lot of it away. But I know it was dead of summer for this one. I was trying to go to sleep, and it's weird. It seems to always start whenever you're trying to sleep. Well, I had a large collection of Power Ranger action figures. Because, I was a kid in the 90s, of course I did. And my favorite one was always the Green Ranger. Well, I'd set these toys up on my dresser at night, just kind of as a display, and if I wasn't playing with them, that's where they'd remain. I remember this one night, so I'm just laying there trying to go to bed. I saw the Green Ranger move. At first, it was just a couple slight movements. Freaked me out, but I kept trying to think it was just a trick of the light, something that I thought was going on, but wasn't. Then it happened again, and again. And before long, it started walking towards me. It climbed down the dresser. I'm sure you can understand what happened next. Basically, I pissed myself and ran out of the room. It wasn't my proudest moment, but again, I was about 6, maybe 7. Who knows at that point? But parents weren't too pleased with me whenever I came running into their room, dripping wet. And, that night got a lot worse for me after that. Of course, I took all the toys, threw them in my closet, never looked at them again, or at least tried not to. But it didn't stop with that. I had a lot of posters on my wall. They moved around quite a bit. The superheroes and other characters inside the posters, they would be all over the place. The doors opening, even more. Yeah, it wasn't a fun time for me. Then I started seeing it. At first, it was just in the corner of my eye, just like a mist or just the way the light hit, But then it got a little sharper. I could see it a little more often. Over the course of several weeks, it went from, I don't know, we'll call it like a bright shadow, if, that helps, if you can understand what that might be, to a full-blown apparition. Now, I didn't know much of this at the time. I mean, I was a young child too, but turns out there's about 3 different kinds of apparitions. The first kind is non-sentient. This is just a repeating loop. Whenever the soul gets trapped, it's in a constant cycle. They're the least harmful. They just kind of scare people. There's the tethered apparitions. These are the ones that kind of brought forth the haunted house legend, or whatever you want to call it. And they're a little more with it. They have their own agendas, we'll say. There's things that they want out there, but for the most part, they're either trapped to a house or an object. There's also the free-roaming ones that just travel around the world, just wherever. They're fully aware of what's going on, and well, they're the least common to run into, because they can control when they're seen, and most of them are completely harmless. They just want to, live their life, we'll call it, the same as anyone else, because they were anyone else. Some of them some of them have some pretty malice ideas, what they try to accomplish with their afterlife, but for the most part, it's just, they just keep to themselves. They're my favorite ones, to be honest. Then there are the poltergeists, which, well, we'll talk about the Bell Witch eventually. But I'm sure, as you can kind of guess from now, this one was a tethered. And honestly, they're probably the most dangerous, other than the poltergeist. Even then, the poltergeist is targeted. These are more of a trapdoor spider kind of deal. They wait for somebody to fall into their web, and then they pounce. And I was the bug in the web for this one. Eventually, it decided to show me what it was fully formed. More of, fully formed. That's an odd way of saying it. It showed me what it really was. And that was kind of a younger woman, I'll say. She looked to be about my age now, in her late 20s, early 30s. Not from this decade, obviously. She was dressed in kind of a simple brown sundress. Probably one of the original owners of the house. And honestly, I never got the history behind that house, who the original inhabitants were, who she was. But at that point, history wasn't really my biggest concern. My concern was just trying to understand what was going on around me. And what was really going on around me was how often she would make herself known, where she would be. There's plenty of times where I was playing in my room or just anywhere away from adult supervision, where I'd see her just staring at me. Again, fully formed, just this mostly transparent face. Of course, I saw the body and everything too, but just her eyes, it was just a blank, emotionless stare directly towards me. I didn't know what she wanted. And if you can imagine that, you know how it was for me. I'd also wake up a lot at night. There she was. This happened for about, say, another 3 weeks until she started trying to interact with me. And what she was trying to do was, just play with me, join in my toys. Mostly she'd try and move them around while I just sat emotionless on the floor, pressed up against a wall if I could, petrified. Sometimes she'd have the toys themselves move around. Usually whenever they got closest to me is whenever I'd run. And again, my parents just thought it was overactive imagination. I I can't really blame them for what they thought. I mean, Christ, if your kid was coming up to you saying they saw a ghost trying to play with you, what would you do? Would you believe them? I mean, knowing what I know, I would, and you should, but it's understandable if you just can't. You find it too hard, especially if the evidence isn't directly in front of you. I mean, neither my mom nor my dad actually witnessed this. It wouldn't make itself known to them. I was on my own. And I didn't know what to do. Eventually, though, I kind of started warming up to it, we'll say. I was used to it. I was no longer afraid. And by the time fall came around, I was starting to play with it. I'd join in on the game. Don't get me wrong, whenever my action figures started moving on their own, that was still very uncomfortable for me, but just the ghost itself seemed almost comforting to me. But then came the day that my parents actually saw it. I was just walking in the hallway. She was right next to me. This one didn't have verbal communications towards me. I could just see it. I don't know what stage in her spectral form she was in, but I'm assuming she wasn't capable of making sound. Maybe she was, and she just preferred not to, but let's just say that whole aspect of ghosts is something I haven't quite fully wrapped my mind around yet. I've had a lot of schooling in it, but I'm still not sure how to specifically understand what kind of specter does what. But there we were, just walking in the hallway. I was going to my room, and my dad rounds the corner and sees her. She vanishes within a second, but then he asked me what... I mean, he was as afraid as I was first. He asked me what was going on, what it was. And I explained to him what it was. That ever since we moved in, I've been noticing her. That every time I said something about her, I was being honest. And it worked for a bit. He believed me. We spent about a week in a hotel. He kept going back, trying to figure out what was up. But eventually we got the church involved. Don't get me wrong, it was just a Methodist church. They didn't have a full exorcist team. It wasn't like it was in the movies, but it was a small group of, we'll say, the elders of the church. They came into the living room. We were all there. They prayed, did whatever it was that they were doing. I was too young to fully understand what it was. And by the end of it, they claimed success. The ghost is gone. Everyone was happy. But that wasn't the case, as I'm sure you guessed. It was only a couple nights later that she appeared again in my room. And at that point she beckoned me to follow her. Now, I don't know if I was just naturally curious enough to see what was going on, or if I trusted her enough, or if I just wanted to play, but we went up into the attic. Now, I'm not sure if I described to you the one room, but let's just say it was full of decades worth of furniture and items. And that's where she wanted me to be, so we can play or something, I don't know. But I stomp a lot when I walk. So my mom had to go upstairs and find me. Which, there I was, just inside a grandfather's clock. Huge thing. Of course, I was kind of bumping up against the pendulum and the chime, so that made a little more noise. And along with me in the clock, the specter was right next to it. Now, I've never known my mother to be exceptionally brave, but at that moment, I watched her run straight through a ghost in order to pry the door open, which it somehow got locked whenever I was in there. But all I remember hearing was the sound of splintering wood as she got, honestly, I don't even know what metal object that was, to just pry it open. Of course, the phantom disappeared at that point, and I was rushed downstairs. We were getting out of the house once and for all, except, well, the apparition had other ideas. Whenever I was putting my shoes on, I was just dragged. I don't even know how to describe it. I just bolted in the air, mind you, all the way downstairs, down to the basement. And I mean, it was going fast. I really couldn't tell what was up. Plus, it was dark. It was nighttime in a basement. Of course, it was dark. I just remember hearing the slamming sound of a car door and feeling just dust-covered leather. Eventually, my parents got a flashlight because the lights weren't working down there at that point to see me in the Studebaker. Now, I was in the back seat along with the apparition, but my dad took the mag light that he had in his hand, used to see down there, and just shattered the front, the windshield of it. And both of them climbed in and got me. I remember seeing my dad trying to punch a ghost too. That was one of the highlights of all this. Eventually I was grabbed yet again, but this time by my mother. And we ran out the door. Of course, we never went back to that house. We sent a few people in there to just pack up our stuff and leave. But we ended up floating around the town that I was living at. I was living in the outskirts at that point. But we ended up floating around there, trying to find other apartments or houses, but I guess it just was too expensive, or maybe what happened there was just too much to live with. So eventually we moved towns. Actually, we moved pretty far. We ended up living in Tennessee. So I went from one side of the Appalachian Mountain Range and just this old, ancient forest region to another end of it. And, well, I'm not going to spoil the next episode for you, but let's just say I've learned what lives here in these woods and mountains. What darkness really calls it home. But anyways, that's it for the first episode of my childhood in the Paranormal Case Report. I plan on making as many as I can, just to help educate the public on what's out there, as well as a cathartic release for me. Just kind of go over my life and how I got so messed up. And also, just kind of as a way to stick it to my former boss. Which, yeah, they're probably going to be after me after this gets out, so... Well, try and just be there. Know if I stop making these episodes, that means something has gotten to me, whether it was man or beast. Who knows at that point, but stay safe out there.